Reading with your kids.
Hey, so great to see you. Come on in. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please do be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Audible, Stitcher Radio, Good Pods, Podchaser, Podcast Addict, Ghana, Himalaya, wherever you find your podcasts. Our guest today is Cheryl Taragin. She is here to celebrate her beautiful picture book. It's a debut picture book. It's called That's Ridiculous, said Nicholas. Before we invite Cheryl into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by another really fun and beautiful picture book. It's called Dino Pajama Party, and it's written by our friend Lori Walmark. Now, if you've been listening to the Reading with Your Kids podcast, you might be thinking to yourself, Lori Walmark? She writes fantastic picture book biographies celebrating women in STEM. And you'd be right. She has written many books about amazing history-making women in the STEM fields. Well, Laurie decided that she wanted to reach out to younger kids in her debut fiction picture book, Dino Pajama Party. Dinos dance and sing until the sun goes down in this rollicking, rhyming bedtime book. You're going to love it. It's a lot of fun, and Laurie was on the program talking about it. She had a lot of fun creating it. You'll feel all that fun when you read Dino Pajama Party to your kids. Joining us right now from right outside of downtown Baltimore, my guest today is here to celebrate her debut picture book. It's called That's Ridiculous, said Nicholas. Please welcome to the show, Cheryl Tarrigan. Hey, Cheryl, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. It's such an honor.
You know, I have to tell you, I think I would have had a blast reading That's Ridiculous, said Nicholas, to my kids when they were young, because it just the title is fun. I mean, I could extend the title to about 5 minutes, I think.
I think when people hear the title, they're thinking to themselves, oh, there's a lot of names that rhyme with things like that. And my nephew even started coming up with ideas. He had said to me, what's your next book? Something like Fred said, or I said, no, it's a character that I created. His name is Nicholas John Paul Martin William Annabelle Tidings, which is a little ridiculous in itself. Mm-hmm. And I think it's catchy. Kids kind of like the idea. It's funny to them that there's this little boy who people are telling things to. He knows that they could not possibly be true. And he says, that's ridiculous. And then he moves on.
Yeah. You know, just as you were saying that, I'm thinking, because we're always looking to start conversations with our kids, and especially start conversations that can last a lifetime. I was sharing a little with Cheryl before we started recording that my daughter is living not too far away from her in Baltimore, and we have had this beautiful ongoing conversation about everything for the last 25 years. It all started with us reading books. And I'm thinking that That's Ridiculous, said Nicholas, about this young guy that's being fed all sorts, as we would say here in Boston, all sorts of baloney. And he has to discern what is real and what isn't real. And that's a really important skill for us to teach to our kids.
I so agree with you. I think it's so difficult for children sometimes to recognize what's true, what isn't true. They put so much faith in us to help them navigate the world. And as parents, that's a hard responsibility. As their teachers, that's a hard responsibility. We don't want to necessarily lead them astray, but we like to get them to do things. So we'll say things to them sometimes that we know are not true. But it helps us to motivate them. And I think it's hard for children when they find out later on that's not true.
Yeah, yeah. I hope my daughter doesn't hear this, but she wouldn't eat anything but chicken when she was growing up. So everything we put on her plate was chicken. Even when it was beef and fish and whatnot. She ate it all and she loved it. But yeah.
Because it made it easier for you to get her to finish her plate.
Mm-hmm.
And you were trying to be a good parent. So because children really, they don't know very much when they're starting off in the world, you were trying to do your job as a parent. But I think sometimes when children learn later on, oh, that's really not chicken. Wait a minute. It can create some difficulties sometimes in the relationship. And that's something that we should be mindful of as parents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, I was talking about lifelong conversations right now. Kids who are putting so much time into social media and being online. And nowadays, when I was growing up, back when we only had 3 channels and I only had a black and white TV, we had pretty much three news sources. And there was a lot of scrutiny, a lot of pressure on them to be accurate, to deliver the news accurately without a slant. That's not happening in the world of social media and online reporting. And our kids right now, the kids that are in social media right now, the teens, especially the teenagers, they haven't really been taught to discern what is real and what isn't, what they should trust and what they shouldn't trust. And so I think we need to catch up with the teens that are online now. But we also have to start preparing our kids. And I think, as ridiculous as it might seem, that a book like That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas is a good way to kind of start those conversations.
Well, thank you so much for suggesting that. It is such a different world today. The world that we grew up in, you're right, it was 3 channels. That's all the information you got, unless you were going to, here in Baltimore, I think it was Channel 5, which was just total entertainment. Otherwise, it was Channel 13, Channel 2, and Channel 11. That was it, and that was all the information that came to us. And kids today, they are bombarded by information constantly. They have their cell phones, they have their social media, they have their friends on top of it. They're dealing with so many sources of information. I think sometimes it is difficult for them to figure out how should I approach a certain situation? Do I trust my own judgment about this? Am I just following the crowd because I'm really not sure? And this book took that concept and said, if we can teach our children when they're young that they should be making decisions for themselves, and how do we teach them to make these choices? I think that's all part of it inside of the book. And it's not really a preachy book. It's a story, but I think the messages do come across that we want our children to be empowered to decide for themselves. We don't want them to be arrogant. We like them to be humble about the way that they make these choices, but we can't always be there for them. And it's important for them to trust themselves and their own instincts.
Yeah. We talked a lot to kids about making choices and letting them know that they can make choices. They have the power to make choices, but we don't spend as much time as we should helping them learn how to make those choices.
That's the key. How do you make that choice? How do you decide what you believe in or what you're going to follow? Or maybe this isn't such a good idea. Maybe you want them to think about it a little bit. There's a portion in the book, kind of towards the end. It's kind of like the denouement moment, in the book, where he's coming home with his grandfather, and his grandfather says to him, he's making silly faces in the mirror, and his grandfather says to him, if you keep making silly faces in the mirror, your face is going to freeze like that. And I think all of us have had a parent tell us that at one time or another. But it's the point in the book where he kind of says to himself, oh, maybe this is true. And he stopped making the silly faces. Even though he thought it was ridiculous, he still listened. And I think that was a turning point for him to decide, maybe what grandfather's telling me is something that I should listen to, even though I do feel that it's not true. And that's important for children. They have to question.
Mm-hmm.
They have to be empowered to at least question. And I think a lot of times as parents, we might say to our children, do it because I said so. And that doesn't allow them the freedom to think.
Mm-hmm. And in all fairness, as a parent who I know I try not to say that very often, but there were times when I did. There are some times when we just need to. I think if we do use that phrase, it's important to say, we'll talk about it later, but right now I need you to do it because, especially,
sure.
especially when we're
Absolutely.
talking
there are
about
definitely emergency moments
right.
where we are taking control because we have to for their own safety, or we don't want them necessarily going to a certain place. But we want, in most situations, we want to empower our children to say to them, okay, you can try this. Maybe it's not something you want for your child, but you can say, okay, try it, and then let them see the natural consequences sometimes of their actions, which is a better teacher than anything that we could do, as long as they're not in jeopardy or they're not going to harm themselves.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Putting that hot sauce on your cereal in the morning probably isn't a good idea. You probably only do it once.
That's ridiculous, said Nicholas.
So
right, and that's all. That's the key here. I'm so blessed to have grandchildren. I get a second chance at raising a child, and I'm noticing that I'm a lot different with my grandchildren. Obviously, I'm a lot more patient, and I don't feel as hassled as I did when I was raising my children. And when my granddaughter wants to do something that I'm a little concerned about, sometimes I will let her do it with supervision. And like, for instance, she had something in her hands last night, and it was a very small object, which you would be terrified to have your child have something like that, because they can easily just pop it in their mouths and swallow it. Mm-hmm. So I was supervising her, and I said, as long as you hold it in your hands, you can have it. And I said, but if you put it in your mouth, then I'm going to have to take it from you. And so she held it in her hand. She looked at it a little bit. She turned it over, and then she went, she just tasted it. And I said, okay, because, we didn't just hold it in our hands. You have to give it to me. And it was not telling her, no, you can't do it. But it was telling her, look, if you want to do this, there are conditions with it. And I want you to make that choice for yourself. If you can hold it in your hands, then you can have it. But if it's going to go up into your mouth, then it's coming to me.
Yeah.
And she didn't protest. There weren't any problems. She knew that she did something that I had already said was a condition, and it avoided the argument that you would normally have with your child. And I felt like she felt empowered too, because she knew that if she had just held it in her hands, she could still have it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What inspired you, Cheryl, to write That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas?
Well, I think there are a lot of children out there who are struggling. Children with special needs, ADHD children, and, children that really are a little bit different. Maybe they're a little difficult. Maybe they have OCD. They're not your average child. They walk to the beat of their own drum normally. And these children are difficult to parent. And really that's what did inspire me to write this book, because it's important to recognize that when you have a child that's a little strong-willed, you want to direct them to the right path. You want to lead them the right way, but you want to do it in such a way that you don't destroy your relationship with the child. Because, Jed, as you know, when you have adult children, it's so important to still have those relationships with them. And if you don't build those relationships as they're growing, then you won't have them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Cheryl, you shared with us earlier that you grew up in the time when there were only 3 channels, and you also shared with us that you're a grandmother. What was it that made you become a children's author at this point in your life?
I think I've always been a writer. from the time I was very little. I loved writing stories. I used to create my own little books. I would write the stories down and I would illustrate them, and then I'd staple them together and I'd show them to my friends and say, oh, look, I wrote a book. And my friends would look at it, and we were little kids then. But really, that's where my love of storytelling started, and I've always been a writer. I did not go into a writer career path. I was involved in law for a very long time. I used my writing skills there. I've always used my writing skills. And I just got to a point in my life where I said, I would like to start telling stories. I know how to craft them. I know how to put them together. And I have a lot of stories to tell, even though they're all fiction. And I'd like to be able to start doing it. And then you get to a point in your life where you say, it's now or never. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of what happened to me. I left the career that I was in and I said, I'm going to focus on writing. This is what I want to do. And if I can make a living at it, all the better. But I have stories to tell, and it's time to send them out into the world.
Wow, that is talk about taking that road less traveled, leaving a career in law to become a children's author, an author. Is being a children's author something that you're going to focus on? Are you planning on telling stories to the world, through adult books, through middle grade, YA?
Possibly. I am now actually trying to negotiate a book deal with a traditional publishing company. We've discussed having a young adult novel this time around. The publisher's very interested in the young adult novel, and I think that's where my next book is going to be. Although, at the same time, I think we're also going to self-publish a book about birds. And I wrote this cute little story about birds, and I have a friend that illustrated them. And I think we're going to put that together and put that out on Amazon also, because children seem to like animal stories. And this is a very cute little story about 3 birds that go out on an adventure. So I think I'm going to start putting out a lot of books all at once.
Awesome. Any stories from your law career going to find their way onto the pages of books, do you think?
Oh, my. Well, I mean, one of my favorite authors is John Grisham, obviously. Mm-hmm. I mean, I love his storytelling. He's so masterful at it. And it's so interesting, to somebody who was actually involved in that type of career. I don't think I'm going to be the next John Grisham now. Well,
those are awfully big shoes to fill.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But all of those books, that genre, it's great to read. And I love how they craft those stories. Sometimes they start from the ending and they work their way backwards, which I love. They have the ending already, but they have to figure out how to get there. And then when you read the story, you can see how it connects from here to here to here. Oh, and then they end up at the end. But of course they started there, which is so interesting. It's just not the way that I write. Mm-hmm. I'm more of a fiction writer who likes to tell fanciful types of stories. Some children's stories would be wonderful, a young adult novel. I even have an idea for an adult novel, which hopefully I'll get to eventually. And, that's the direction I would like to go.
Yeah. And will you be setting any of your stories in the beautiful city of Baltimore, do you think?
That is such a good question. When I see things sometimes, like over the Thanksgiving holiday weekend, there were things that I saw and I said, this would make such a cute story. What would be the angle? And you really have to think about it, because every story has already been written before. Mm-hmm. That's the truth. There's a lot of stuff out there, and people are writing now. They don't even need a traditional publisher. They're just putting things out there. So you have to kind of think to yourself, how would I make it a little bit different? What would I do to put my own style on it? How would this story be totally original? And I do get those ideas sometimes, and I think to myself, oh, there is a little idea here about something with Baltimore or Maryland. And I have noticed that those stories do resonate with people. Actually, I just want to say That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas was just recently included on the Maryland Governor website page in the kids section when they are listing Maryland authors. So that was a huge honor for me.
Awesome.
That they included it. And I feel so honored to have it there. It's not necessarily a story about a Baltimore boy, but it comes from my Baltimore upbringing. So I think maybe they kind of saw that in the story.
Oh, that's wonderful. Congratulations. That is
Thank
quite
you.
an honor.
It is. It's a huge honor.
Yeah. Well, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas, and also find out more about you.
I just love the way you say the title. Thank you. That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas is available wherever books are sold. It's primarily being sold right now on Amazon and Barnes & Noble. But if you do a Google search for the name, it comes up in other places. I actually saw it being sold at Walmart. So it's available wherever books are sold.
That's wonderful. And what about, is there a website or places in social media that folks can find you?
Thank you so much for asking. Right now, the publisher who did the book has all of the links to the places where they would like to send people. It's available in hardcover, paperback, and in ebook form. So you can also go to Google Play or iTunes and get the book. So they are Page Publishing, and the way that you would find that would be to come to my social media, let's say on Facebook, where I have a page for That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas. I'm also on Instagram as Cheryl Tarrigan, and I have a Pinterest page where I started up a little board for That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas, and it has all the information where you can find the book.
Awesome. We've had a really fun time speaking to the author of the debut picture book that sounds like so much fun. It's called That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas, and our guest has been the author, Cheryl Tarrigan. Hey, Cheryl, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thank you, Jed. Thank you so much for this time. It's been lovely.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Allie Melaninko. She'll be here to celebrate Ghost Girl. Yeah, Allie, you might remember she is part of the Spooky Middle Grade Author Group. She was on helping us celebrate Halloween not too long ago. She's back with us to celebrate Ghost Girl. We can't wait. Hey, if you are the author of a fantastic children's book, you may be frustrated at how difficult it is letting the world know about your book. I mean, you probably didn't realize it, but there are literally thousands of books published every single, you thought I was going to say year. No, every single month. There are literally thousands of books published every single month. It is really hard to stand out amongst that crowd of books, especially if you are a debut author, especially if you are an indie or a self-published author. Well, you don't have to do it by yourself. We can help. The Reading with Your Kids podcast is ready to help you celebrate your book and tell the world how great it is. You can be a guest on the podcast. Being a guest, it's fun, it's easy. It gives you the chance to tell thousands of people about your fantastic book, and it doesn't cost a thing. You can also enter your book into our Certified Great Read program. If our panel believes that your book is worthy of 4 or 5 out of 5 stars, it becomes a Certified Great Read, and that is a great way to let families know that your book is worthy of their consideration. Oh, and have you heard about our monthly promotion program? This is an incredible program. We'll celebrate your book through commercials on the podcast, through messages to our 63 or 64,000 plus social media followers, and your book will be displayed on our nationwide network of digital pedestrian billboards. It will be seen by people in Boston, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Sacramento, Albany, New York, Toledo, Ohio. Wow! You can learn all about these opportunities by going to our website, readingwithyourkids.com. Click on the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page. Scroll on down to see our various services. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to start by thanking our guest, Cheryl Tarrigan. Be sure to check out That's Ridiculous, Said Nicholas. Also want to thank our sponsor, Lori Walmart. Be sure to check out Dino Pajama Party. And you also want to check out her wonderful historical biographical picture books celebrating women in STEM. I want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank Augie the doggy. He's here keeping me secure in the studio. But most of all, we want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.